Born under the strictest secrecy in 1984, that round-faced baby could not have imagined that his grandfather was the supreme leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The founding father, Kim Il-sung, and the newborn also could not have imagined that his father was Kim Jong-il, the official heir of that unique state without parallel in our history. But the days when Kim Jong-un was born in 1984 were very different from the days of sweat and blood that his grandfather faced fighting under the banners of communism. They were also different days from those of his father, as the latent successor of that crownless monarchy that was being built in the Asian world. When Kim was born on cold January days in the North Korean capital, they were days of greater calm, tense, but calm nonetheless. And they were days of growing enthusiasm for the birth of a potentially formidable successor to lead the role of supreme commander of the Korean People's Army. A baby who couldn't rationalize, who was about to become the head of state of one of the most unique, enigmatic, doomed, and exotic models in recent history. This newborn we're learning about today is the third in a family dynasty that has ruled under the so-called Juche ideology. A newborn who, as of the date of this video, is already approaching 40 years old, and he has about 500 nuclear warheads under his control. This is Reynaldo Carrillo Vilches speaking. And for those who have asked how to support the new encyclopedia, I'm bringing you the news that we've created a Patreon with exclusive documentaries on the most controversial topics, with live seminars taught by us, and your support is essential to keep this project alive. Below you can find the link, and in case you don't have an international card for Patreon, we have several payment options for you. And you'll also be included in the community. We'll be waiting for you there. And without further ado, let's start today's video. Subscribe. Even though Kim Jong-un's biographical data can be contradictory, it is believed that Kim Jong-un was born on January 8, 1984, in Pyongyang. His grandfather was Kim Il-sung, who ruled North Korea from 1948 to 1994, and his father was Kim Jong-il, the heir who would rule from 1994 until 2011. Since childhood, Kim Jong-un resembled his grandfather more than his father in philosophy, physique, and psychology. As a child, Kim dressed like his grandfather, wearing the Korean military uniform with buttons and a small straw hat. It should be said that his father, Kim Jong-il, had more children with different mothers. However, young Kim Jong-un would only live with and get to know his siblings from the same father and mother. His childhood was, as his life has been up to the present, one marked by power and luxury. Since he was a child, he has lived as the heir to a royal monarchy, with all the responsibilities that come with it. But at the same time, having at his disposal large estates and luxuries, vehicles modified for him, and all kinds of imported gadgets and toys. Beyond the rhetoric that this highly anti-Western political movement may have had, the heir Kim Jong-un developed a strong interest in movies and sports from a young age, among other Western customs. Young Kim was especially favored by his grandfather, from whom, as we mentioned, he inherits a character that combines an austere image, closeness to the people, a severe temperament, and a sacred secrecy. When he was 8 years old in 1992, after long debates within the family, his father, Kim Jong-il, decided that out of all the siblings, he, Kim Jong-un, would be his heir. This occurred before Kim Jong-il, his father, came to power. This marks the first turning point in Kim Jong-un's life, because from this moment on, Kim is exalted within the regime as the child who would one day lead the destiny of the nation, and he would become the great leader of that unique state that North Korea is today. And even though back then, in 1992, when he was just a child of 8 years old that day, might have seemed very far away. Little by little, events started to accelerate, and the stage was being set for his rise. By July 8, 1994, at the age of 92, his beloved grandfather, Kim Il-sung, passed away when he was already about 10 years old. The passing of the first supreme leader of North Korea is an event that impacts not only that nation, but the entire world. Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of our protagonist, whom we must study to understand him today, was born on April 15, 1912, at a time when Korea, a nation with a rich and ancient history, had recently been annexed by the Japanese Empire as part of its expansionist campaign, and as a military leader with experience in guerrilla warfare. In 1939, he moved to the Asian region of the Soviet Union. It was the great imperial Soviet state, which, with growing interests in that region, decided to provide military and financial support. The rise of Kim Il-sung as the visible leader of the anti-Japanese movement in Korea. So when World War II ended and the Japanese occupation of the Korean peninsula was over, it was divided at the 38th parallel into two halves, the well-known North and the well-known South. The South, with Seoul as the most important city in the area, is occupied by the Americans. Meanwhile, the North, with the city of Pyongyang, is occupied by the Soviets. Under Soviet occupation, Kim Il-sung, supported by them and relying more on his popularity than on his brief experience, triumphantly enters Pyongyang in September 1945, and soon after, knowing himself to be the de facto leader of the Northern Territory, he begins a program of communist policies, which culminates with the proclamation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and of Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of our protagonist. As supreme commander of the armed forces and supreme leader of the nation, Kim Il-sung develops this policy based on the so-called ideology, Juche, the yucca. It was a formulation of its own principles, inspired by the orthodox communism that Kim Il-sung learned during his time in exile in China. But it has been adapted to the realities and needs of North Korea. Its principles included political independence with a strong anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist connotation, partly due to Korea's experience with Japan. Other principles included economic self-sufficiency, military self-defense, and Korean unionism, which sought the unification of the two Koreas under the banner of the Communist North, as well as establishing man as the sole master of his destiny and history's driving force. And finally, the Juche ideology proposed the ideological, technical, and cultural continuity of the revolutionary process. And in order to carry out this ideology, the Juche movement is organized under the so-called Workers' Party of Korea, founded by Kim Il-sung himself on October 10, 1945. In its statutes, the party defines that Juche as a movement has four fundamental theoretical pillars. The so-called great leader, who would be the guide, has historically been the Kims in that party. The party itself as an entity, popular forces organized in unions, neighborhoods, and youth organizations. And the fourth pillar, the army, with these new positions. But faced with an impoverished society with scarce natural resources and decimated by the Japanese occupation, Kim Il-sung will endure all kinds of tribulations throughout the second half of the 20th century. The first of these great tribulations was the so-called Korean War of 1953, which, although very costly and bloody, did not change much the situation of the Korean peninsula, since the North remained aligned with the Soviet Communist bloc and the South with the American capitalist bloc. In this way, the so-called Democratic People's Republic of Korea, also known as North Korea, in the next 40 years of Kim Il-sung's supreme rule, it will undergo a major transformation, building what will become a unique model in history. To this day, more than a one-party regime, it will be a single-party family dynasty, although embodied in the Workers' Party, also known as the Juche Party. Will it rely on family succession? As for the Supreme Command, in turn supported by a group of families and officers, they hold the North Korean military power. This is perhaps one of the most closed regimes in the world when it comes to foreign influences, willing to regulate or eliminate all kinds of public freedoms based on the interests of state security. A political and social system in which Kim Il-sung becomes the protagonist of a mythology, where he is officially almost like a living god, who liberated the people of Korea from colonialism and oppression, guiding them toward a more just, perfect, and progressive society. Every mural, every statue, and every street usually has something to say about its leader. But even though this is the case, he was almost like a living god to the North Korean people. He managed to forge a system where, despite his physical absence, once he left this world, the same political and social order could be maintained and even continued. That entire superstructure is left without its leader one day, when Kim Il-sung passes away, and it's up to Kim Jong-il, the father of our protagonist, to be proclaimed the new supreme leader of North Korea, taking over the office of his late father and starting a new era for that country and for his son, Kim Jong-un. At that time, Kim Jong-il, the new supreme leader of the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, had to face a country with serious problems. Even from the 1950s to 1970s, the nation maintained orderly finances and industrial development plans that allowed it to overcome the difficulties of that time. With the help of the Soviet Union, China, and other countries from the communist bloc, that planned economy system was able to function within its own standards. However, in the 1980s, that regime's public spending mainly focused on military defense. According to them, it was the only way to guarantee the country's independence and political sovereignty. But this decision, along with other policies, combined with a closed and politically besieged economy, resulted in a growing and intense trade imbalance, which, together with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992, led to a period of severe poverty that ultimately resulted in a famine officially known by the regime as the Arduous March, during which, according to estimates, between 1994 and 2000, about 3 million North Koreans died. But in a rather parallel and paradoxical way, the life of the future leader, Kim Jong-un, is very different. By 1996, he was only about 12 years old, and in order to prepare for his future position, he left North Korea at that time, using a false identity as Park Un, in order to study under that identity at the International School of Bern in Switzerland, a private and high-end institution in Switzerland. The young Kim, or better known there at that time as Park, was the son of a supposed North Korean diplomat. He developed a strong passion for basketball, achieving a high level of skill. According to his former classmates, who described him as quite good at that sport, his favorite team was the Chicago Bulls, and Michael Jordan was his favorite player. At the same time, several of his former classmates remember him as someone shy, quiet, not very academically inclined, and rather as someone who often skipped classes. Languages didn't come easily to him either, like German, although he did speak English well. In 1998, he moved to another institution, a public school, in the same town as his previous school. In this new school, along with basketball, he developed another particular interest, in this case with aviation and mechanics. Meanwhile, young Kim entertained himself with movies by Jean-Claude Van Damme, Jackie Chan, and Sylvester Stallone. Many biographers and scholars attribute a more Western and diplomatic character to his stay in Switzerland, both in the manners and actions of Kim Jong-un, in contrast to his predecessors, a Westernization that will become evident during his future rule. While he was staying abroad in 2001, he was abruptly called back to North Korea without any apparent explanation. At that time, he was 17 years old. At Kim Il-sung Military University, where 6 years later, in 2007, he graduated as a physicist with the rank of Army officer. In this way, according to many, he confirmed his position as the heir to his father, Kim Jong-il, who, at a young age, was already taking interesting steps. As the supreme leader of North Korea, he largely maintains the course set by Kim Il-sung. Self-sufficiency, political independence, and prioritization of the military industry when it comes to budget allocation. The pursuit of political and economic independence from foreign influence. It would be carried out at whatever cost was necessary, and the reach of the state's powers would be absolute. The persecution remained severe, especially against those who unsuccessfully tried to escape from North Korea. And something that characterizes Kim Jong-il is strengthening North Korea's nuclear program. This had started in the late 1970s with help from the Soviet government. The Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center was opened, where a graphite-moderated nuclear reactor and a plutonium processing plant would operate. With a view to military use by the 1990s, the United States expressed concern over the fact that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was developing a nuclear bomb. Therefore, in 1994, the agreed framework was signed, an agreement aimed at freezing the operations of the nuclear center in Yongbyon in exchange for United States energy aid and the construction of 2 water reactors in North Korea. But the reality is that the Republic of North Korea, no matter how much pressure it was receiving to stop its nuclear activities, was willing to continue its projects secretly because they believed that those bombs were the only guarantee they would have to maintain a certain level of protection and autonomy as an independent state. And, in fact, by the year 2000, the breaking of this agreement was already made public, because information was leaked that North Korea was secretly continuing to develop weapons with nuclear potential at the Yongbyon Center, as well as in other facilities. And new evidence comes on October 9, 2006, when North Korea successfully carries out its first underground nuclear test, with an explosion that reaches less than 1 kiloton of power, as if making it known deliberately. After these events, through Resolution 1718, at the United Nations, sanctions are imposed to restrict the export of North Korean firearms, the import of refined oil, trade in precious minerals, and North Korean investment activities abroad. North Korea already had various forms of trade blockade since its very foundation, and these new sanctions were not a problem, because Kim Jong-il, with the strategic help of China and Russia, managed to evade many of these sanctions and maintain valuable trade agreements with his allies. After this, on May 25, 2009, the second nuclear test was carried out in North Korea, which, according to estimates, could have reached a yield of between 2 to 7 tons. And as these nuclear tests progressed, so did Kim Jong-un, who, although unofficially, had been designated as his father's future successor when he was 8 years old. It was only on September 27, 2010, that he was publicly presented at an unusual Workers' Party conference. An unusual public appearance that fueled rumors about the health of his father, Kim Jong-il. And the day after this, on September 28, he was suddenly appointed vice chairman of the Workers' Party Military Commission and a member of its Central Committee. At the same time, he was granted the military rank of 4-star general, one of the highest distinctions. Despite his limited experience, Kim was such an unknown figure at that time. It was as a result of this event that the international community saw the very first photograph ever of him. Thus, in 2011, he appeared at multiple public events, always very close to his father. They were a clear sign that the world was witnessing the successor of Kim Jong-il. And indeed, on December 17, 2011 at 8:30 in the morning, the supreme leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il, died at the age of 69 from a heart attack, presumably caused by a long illness that has not yet been revealed. That same day, December 17, Kim Jong-un was invested with the position of Supreme Leader of the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. For many countries around the world, Kim was still an unknown figure. The CIA knew some things, but not as much as they would have liked. For North Koreans, Kim Jong-un was the living image of his grandfather, just like the new leader, in whom they had to focus all their support to begin a new era, somewhat different from the others. Kim. But Kim Jong-un's rapid rise to the head of state raises doubts within the very top of the regime, especially among those who doubted the young man's inexperience. One of them was his uncle, Jang Son-taek, a rather influential person within the regime, who gained some popularity both inside and outside North Korea. Following the rise of Kim Jong-un, his nephew, he was also the one who managed the secret finances of the Kim Jong-un regime. He suspected his uncle's loyalty and was aware that he did not have the same level of financial power that his uncle held. And as a result of this situation, in December 2013, his uncle Jang Son-taek was arrested by regime officials. He was then tortured and prosecuted on alleged charges such as embezzlement and even adultery, eventually being sentenced to death and executed on December 12, according to South Korean intelligence, allegedly with a powerful anti-aircraft machine gun, leaving basically no remains of him. This is an example of the intrigues and challenges he had to face since his arrival, a young man. Kim Jong-un to one of the most secretive and besieged states in the world. After these events with his uncle, Kim Jong-un, he made it clear that he was willing to do the same as his father and grandfather to maintain power and stability in North Korea. Therefore, it will be a regime that, during Kim Jong-un's rule, will also maintain strict surveillance over civil society in order to, quote, neutralize the enemies of the state. There have been new cases of executions and very disciplined and strict state supervision. But despite the fact that certain problematic practices remain, Kim Jong-un is introducing some changes within this new North Korea. In his first official appearances, he is accompanied by his wife, Ri Sol-ju. This was not at all common with his predecessors, who used to appear alone and kept their private lives highly secret. On the other hand, while his father, Kim Jong-il, was reserved and distant from the people, Kim Jong-un is going to be more like his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, as he will allow people to approach him, hug him, and even talk and joke with him. Something not seen in a long time that scholars say has positively affected the North Korean people's view of their leader. In economic terms, Kim Jong-un's regime kept its focus on self-sufficiency, a model that has prevailed in that nation in an unusual way for over half a century, unlike the rest of the world. Still, Kim Jong-un seeks to expand and diversify North Korea's income sources. According to some scholars, that republic's income is centered on three activities: the export of minerals such as zinc, lead, and magnesite, United Nations sanctioned international trade, China, which buys 90% of these products. Secondly, they finance the state of Kim Jong-un, the sale of weapons and missiles to Iran, Syria, and recently to Russia. They have even carried out cyber attacks on banks and financial institutions, from which they have extracted nearly $2 billion a year. This combined with agriculture and domestic industry, along with thousands of workers. And Russia make up the bulk of North Korea's financial income. And since the arrival of Kim Jong-un, he has promoted, for example, the flourishing of so-called markets within North Korea. Markets created for the private trade of goods and food. Over time, these markets have come to cover nearly 60% of local demand in North Korea. This is while still allocating at least 20% of the nation's income to the military industry and the defense system. This has managed to keep North Korea in a favored position against several of its enemies. When Kim Jong-un first takes power, he is determined to continue and strengthen his father's nuclear program. On February 12, 2013, he carries out the third successful nuclear test with a bomb that could have reached 16 kilotons of power. The growth of this nuclear power leads to actions and statements from United States presidents like Barack Obama, who chooses a so-called strategic patience in which no new sanctions or direct actions are added against North Korea. More or less the same policy. The presidency of George Bush from 2001 to 2009. Meanwhile, North Korea argued that if the United States and other countries could have nuclear arsenals, they had the same right. A right that Kim Jong-un, as supreme leader, was willing to defend in this way. In January 2016, although there are doubts about the truth of the event, North Korea appears to detonate a hydrogen bomb, a release of energy supposedly many times greater than the bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Although this event has not been proven, it continues to generate public statements, not only in the United States, but also from its allies in the region, such as South Korea and Japan. 9 months after this, on September 9, 2016, the fifth nuclear test was carried out with a fission bomb that would reach a yield of between 10 and 25 kilotons. The publication of this event generates statements from international organizations. But Kim Jong-un's Korea was determined to continue with the production of nuclear weapons by 2017. Another concrete event shakes public opinion, as Kim Jong-nam, the older half-brother of Kim Jong-un, while he was calmly traveling through Kuala Lumpur Airport in Malaysia, out of nowhere, 2 women assaulted him and smeared a strange substance in his eyes. Immediately after, Kim Jong-nam starts to feel unwell, asks the authorities for help, and is taken to the hospital, already showing no vital signs. It was a cold-blooded murder of the half-brother of the head of state of North Korea, using a chemical weapon called Nerve Agent VX. Months before this murder, Kim Jong-nam had given some interviews to Western media, where, although he did not criticize the North Korean regime, he did say that a third family generation of the regime led by his half-brother was already unacceptable. There have been plenty of hypotheses and speculations that Kim Jong-un himself had ordered to get rid of his half-brother. However, none of this is clear, and there is no solid evidence. What is certain is that in that same year, 2017, a man named Donald Trump assumed the presidency of the United States, who, in the midst of all this context of pressure from the nuclear race, states nonchalantly, under his rhetoric of more peace and fewer wars, that he was willing to talk with Kim Jong-un. He claims to have no fear of him and actually recognizes him as someone with great intelligence as a leader. In response to this, after an entire additional year of nuclear tests on September 3rd, Kim Jong-un, through North Korean television, publicly shows the successful detonation of a hydrogen bomb with an alleged capacity of between 100 and 250 kilotons, and with the alleged potential to even reach the United States. This causes more commotion, not just nationally, but internationally, among those who are reminded of old memories of the threat of massive nuclear destruction. After this public detonation, Kim Jong-un claims that the fundamental basis of the nuclear program was complete in North Korea. What followed would just refine what was already achieved. Amid this commotion, Trump responds with sanctions and tariffs. But this is not going to prevent Kim Jong-un from continuing to obtain resources and maintaining his arms race. For him, then, the only way to guarantee the political sovereignty of North Korea. And in the midst of these tensions, which even included a threat on Twitter from Donald Trump that he was going to launch nuclear bombs at North Korea, Kim Jong-un ends up achieving something that neither his grandfather nor his father had managed in their lifetimes: getting the United States to negotiate on his own terms. Since Kim Jong-un managed to enter the select group of leaders who controlled a nuclear arsenal that, even if modest, was enough to defend against any power, though the military superiority of the United States and its allies is clear. Kim Jong-un knew the era of major United States military interventions was ending, and the possibility of negotiating new terms with better prospects was opening up. In this way, after threatening each other with death on Twitter, a first meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un was achieved. On June 12, 2018 in Singapore, a historic meeting with a pleasant exchange of gifts where both parties agree on the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in North Korea. Kim Jong-un presents these negotiations to his people as a battle won by the North Korean people, since after much insistence on their nuclear program. With that first meeting, the foundations were laid for a new stage of meetings and summits, which, beyond concrete results, have not prevented Kim Jong-un's Korea from continuing to develop nuclear arsenal, to this day without many concrete results. Between February 27 and 28, 2019, Trump and Kim meet again in Vietnam. But no new agreement is reached, and Trump ends up imposing new sanctions on North Korea and showing public rejection. It is after this that on June 30, 2019, Donald Trump acts on behalf of Kim Jong-un's regime. That was his trip to North Korea, crossing the famous border and achieving a handshake in that place. It was the first time a United States president crossed the militarized border between the two Koreas. Now, beyond the negotiations and talks, Kim Jong-un will continue to carry out short-range nuclear missile tests. After less than a month and everything that was the global quarantine, starting in 2020, they made the United States lose interest in the North Korean issue to allegedly focus on more pressing matters. This has allowed the North Korean nuclear issue to have even less oversight from the major powers. Others say that the United States may have succeeded, not so much by preventing North Korea's nuclear proliferation, but supposedly by bringing Kim Jong-un closer to the West. The truth is that under the leadership of Kim Jong-un, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has continued to strengthen its arsenal, which it values as a fundamental element for its independence and political sovereignty. By 2011, the young Kim had 1,100,000 active soldiers, between 4,000 and 8,000 tanks, 800 aircraft, and 70 submarines. As of today, 2025, he has 1,320,000 active soldiers, more than 10,000 tanks, 950 aircraft, and 80 submarines. And when it comes to nuclear warheads, North Korea currently has between 50 and 90 warheads, and more than 20 types of ballistic missiles. All of this was achieved in record time by Kim Jong-un, who was once seen as inexperienced. But today, he is leading a nation with the fourth largest active military force in the world. Putting aside the military aspect, which is vital for our protagonist and his nation, Kim has also made notable changes in North Korean life. For example, he has opened shopping centers, water parks, amusement parks, and many more Western-style facilities. He has also encouraged North Korea's participation in international events, such as the Olympic Games, the 2014 World Cup, and the 2018 Asian Cup, done in a way that had never been done in previous years. Kim's regime has opened its doors to foreign tourists at levels never seen before, building several luxury resort complexes for this purpose. Another substantial change is Kim Jong-un's gradual inclusion of his sister, Kim Jo-hoon, in North Korean life. According to some, Kim's sister is even smarter than the leader himself, and some do not rule out the possibility of an early succession from Kim to his sister. Another person has been steadily gaining ground. It's Kim Jong-un's own daughter, named Kim Ju-ah, who was possibly born between 2012 and 2013, and whose future as a possible successor is still uncertain. Kim Jong-un, of course, is not only the supreme leader of North Korea, the absolute ruler of that country. He has at his disposal not only the resources, the population, and the army, but also fleets of vehicles, several mansions, and numerous properties. Some say he's very enthusiastic about drinking and partying. It is no secret that he has a delicate state of health and obesity, which has been handled with great discretion. Well, many believe that Kim Jong-un might suffer from both diabetes and hypertension, among other conditions. But as of today, and about to complete 15 years of his rule, Kim Jong-un is politically more stable than ever. Has he kept an isolated, autarkic, and sanctioned nation sustaining its way of life? And, moreover, position it as the 9th country with the most nuclear warheads, without help from the West, overcoming the whirlwind of economic crises, international blockade, and worldwide condemnation. Kim Jong-un has remained, for better or worse, as firm as a rock in one of the world's states and political models. What else has managed to remain isolated, following its own path, independent from the rest of the international trends? A totalitarian state, in the old original sense of the word, that continues to cause astonishment, rejection, and intrigue in many nations. Thank you for watching this video. Your support means a lot to us. By leaving your comments, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, sharing the video with all your friends, and clicking the bell to activate notifications. This was Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches speaking. This is the New Encyclopedia. As always, we thank you for all your support and many blessings to everyone.